The obsidian chamber of the Galactic Council pulsed with an electric tension that even the most stoic alien diplomats couldn't ignore. Holographic displays flickered with complex data streams, casting prismatic shadows across the faces of 100 different species, each one watching with a mixture of anticipation and barely concealed contempt. Admiral Elena Rodriguez stood alone at the center of the circular chamber. She wasn't restrained, wasn't guarded. Her very posture was a statement of defiance that spoke volumes before she uttered a single word. The neural link tattoos running along her temples glimmered with a subtle, almost imperceptible blue light, a hint of the technological marvel that humanity had become. Ambassador Krultax of the Zorn Imperium rose first, its silicon-based body shifting like liquid metal as it approached the central podium. The creature's voice emerged as a series of precise, mechanical clicks translated into human language. Humanity represents the greatest threat to galactic stability in recorded history. Your species has consistently demonstrated an inability to conform, to integrate, to understand the delicate balance of interstellar diplomacy. Elena's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She knew this moment had been decades in the making, a carefully orchestrated dance of political manipulation that would culminate today. The charges were extensive: unauthorized colonization of contested systems, technological disruptions that threatened established economic structures, repeated violations of first contact protocols, cultural contamination of emerging civilizations. Each accusation was a carefully crafted weapon designed to strip humanity of its interstellar rights. What the Council didn't know was that this trial was already over before it began. Deep within the communication networks that connected the vast galactic infrastructure, a quantum virus developed by humanity's most brilliant minds was already spreading. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but of transformation. Each line of code was a carefully designed algorithm that would rewrite, redirect, and ultimately liberate critical systems. As Ambassador Krultax continued its monotonous list of accusations, Elena's neural implant received a series of encrypted messages. The first wave of human colonies were already in motion. Massive colony ships that had been disguised as routine cargo vessels, scientific research platforms, and diplomatic transports were now breaking away from their assigned routes. The real magic was in the preparation. For decades, humanity had been playing a long game. Every diplomatic mission, every scientific exchange, every seemingly innocuous trade agreement, they were all pieces of a grand strategy. The humans had been seeding critical infrastructure with adaptive technologies, creating backdoors and alternative pathways that would activate at a moment's notice. Your species lacks the fundamental understanding of cosmic harmony, Krultax continued, its crystalline body refracting light in hypnotic patterns. You approach every interaction as a problem to be solved, rather than a relationship to be nurtured. Elena's response was measured, each word carefully chosen. Harmony is not conformity. Evolution is not about maintaining a static balance, but about adapting, changing, pushing beyond established boundaries. A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Translation systems worked overtime to capture the nuanced implications of her statement. At that precise moment, the first phase of humanity's grand strategy began to unfold. Communication relays across multiple star systems began to shift, redirect, and ultimately disconnect. It wasn't a violent takeover, but a surgical redistribution of information and access. Dr. Marcus Chen, watching from a secure facility light years away, allowed himself a rare smile. The quantum probability manipulation they had been developing for decades was about to prove its worth. Entire star charts were subtly being rewritten, creating impossible corridors of safe passage that defied traditional understanding of spatial mechanics. The Galactic Council was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology, its military might, or its adaptability. It was the ability to turn a moment of apparent defeat into the greatest opportunity for transformation. As the final charges were being read, Elena activated the last piece of their preparation. A holographic display erupted behind her, showing not images of destruction or defiance, but of human colonies, scientific achievements, cultural developments. It was a testament to what humanity could achieve when pushed to the absolute limit. "We are not being exiled," she declared, her voice cutting through the chamber like a laser. "We are being set free." The verdict was already a foregone conclusion. Banishment, complete removal from established galactic territories. What the Council didn't realize was that this wasn't a punishment, it was humanity's ultimate liberation. As the final gavel fell, signaling humanity's official expulsion, Elena Rodriguez knew that the real journey was just beginning. The quantum virus was spreading, the colony ships were moving, and humanity was about to show the galaxy what true potential looked like. The first hour after the Council's verdict was a symphony of controlled chaos. Unlike the panicked evacuations one might expect, humanity's exodus was a precisely choreographed dance of technological marvel and human resilience. Lieutenant Aisha Nguyen stood on the bridge of the colony ship Horizon Breaker, her augmented eyes tracking multiple holographic displays simultaneously. Each display represented more than just a ship. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of human potential. The vessel wasn't simply a means of transportation. It was a mobile research station, a genetic repository, and a seed of civilization. "Quantum entanglement corridors are stabilizing," reported Dr. Kazuki Tanaka, his fingers dancing across a neural interface that seemed to anticipate his thoughts before he could form them. "We're maintaining structural integrity at 99.7% across the fleet." What looked like a random collection of ships to an outside observer was actually a meticulously designed organic network. Each vessel carried specialized components: genetic archives, technological prototypes, cultural memory banks. They were more than refugees. They were the distilled essence of human civilization, prepared to rebuild from the absolute minimum. Deep within the Horizon Breaker's genetic research wing, Dr. Elena Gonzalez worked on something far more revolutionary than simple preservation. Her team was developing adaptive symbiotic technologies that would allow humans to interface directly with entirely new environments. Traditional terraforming was too slow, too rigid. What they were creating was a living, breathing adaptation mechanism. "The latest genetic sequence is showing unprecedented plasticity," she muttered, more to herself than to her team. A holographic model of a human cell twisted and reshaped itself, demonstrating potential mutations that could allow survival in environments previously considered impossible. Meanwhile, in the ship's quantum computing core, a different kind of miracle was unfolding. The navigation systems weren't just calculating routes, they were actively negotiating with the fabric of spacetime itself. Dr. Marcus Chen's quantum probability manipulation had evolved into something that defied conventional understanding of physics. "We're creating pathways," Chen explained to a group of young researchers, "not by moving through space, but by convincing space to move around us." The pursuing alien hunter-killer squadrons found themselves trapped in a nightmare of impossible physics. Gravitational anomalies appeared and disappeared without warning. Navigation systems went haywire. What should have been a straightforward pursuit became a mind-bending chase through a reality that seemed to bend and twist at humanity's whim. Captain Rajesh Kapoor commanded the defensive coordination from the Horizon Breaker's tactical center. Unlike traditional military strategies, their approach was fluid, adaptive. Each ship in the fleet was both an individual unit and part of a larger living network. Information, resources, and defensive capabilities flowed between vessels like blood through a complex circulatory system. "Incoming quantum signature," a young tactical officer called out. "Looks like a Zorn tracking probe." Kapoor didn't even need to give an order. The fleet's defensive systems had already analyzed the threat, developed a response, and were implementing a solution before the human crew could fully process the information. The probe found itself caught in a carefully constructed quantum interference pattern. Instead of providing tracking information, it began broadcasting a complex series of mathematical patterns that would take decades to decode, if they were decodable at all. In the residential sections of the Horizon Breaker, life continued with remarkable normalcy. Children attended virtual schools that were simultaneously educational platforms and advanced research environments. Artists created works that blended physical and digital realities. Entire cultural archives were being continuously updated, preserved, and reimagined. We're not just running. Dr. Chen had repeatedly emphasized during the preparation phases. We're evolving. We're creating a new form of civilization that isn't bound by the limitations of our past or the constraints imposed by others. As the fleet continued its journey, the quantum corridors they traveled through were subtly changing. What began as an escape route was slowly being transformed into something more, a network of possibilities, a living pathway that would become the foundation of humanity's new frontier. Lieutenant Nguyen watched the displays, a sense of anticipation building. They weren't just searching for a new home. They were writing the next chapter of human existence, line by quantum entangled line. The stars outside seemed to bend and reshape themselves, a visual metaphor for the incredible journey humanity had just begun. No longer confined by the narrow expectations of the Galactic Council, they were becoming something entirely new. A civilization defined not by where they came from, but by the infinite potential of where they could go. The planet screamed defiance with every breath. Nova Terra was not a world for the weak. Radiation storms danced across methane-laden skies. Tectonic plates shifted with such volatility that entire mountain ranges could form and dissolve within hours. Atmospheric pressure fluctuated wildly, creating wind systems that could shred conventional materials in moments. Zaran Kozi stood at the edge of the primary landing zone, her environmental suit a marvel of adaptive technology that was more living organism than protective gear. Around her, the first wave of human colonists worked with a precision that bordered on organic synchronicity. Incoming plasma surge, her suit's eye warned, its voice a calm counterpoint to the chaos outside. Zara didn't even need to move. The suit's molecular structure was already realigning, creating a protective field that would dissipate the incoming energy. This was not traditional colonization. This was biological warfare against an entire planet. Dr. Imani Rahman, lead cynocologist, monitored the initial breakthrough from the primary research hub. Her team had developed something far beyond traditional terraforming techniques. They were creating a symbiotic relationship with the planet itself. Neural mesh is at 62% integration. She reported, her augmented eyes tracking hundreds of micro-interactions happening simultaneously. The adaptive substrate is showing unexpected quantum resonance. What looked like simple drilling operations were actually complex neural networks being established. Each probe wasn't just collecting data, it was negotiating with the planet's fundamental structure. Geological systems that had been stable for millions of years were being subtly convinced to reshape themselves. In the biodome construction zone, engineers worked alongside AI systems that were more collaborative partners than tools. Nanofabrication units didn't just build structures, they grew them. Walls formed from molecularly programmed materials that could sense, adapt, and self-repair. The line between constructed environment and living organism blurred completely. Captain Raj Patel, leading the Planetary Defense and Infrastructure team, watched as the first major settlement began to take shape. It wasn't a city in any traditional sense. It was a living, breathing ecosystem that happened to support human life. "We're not conquering this world," he often told his team. "We're negotiating with it." Deep beneath the surface, a breakthrough was happening that would redefine human understanding of planetary adaptation. A team led by Dr. Elena Gonzalez had discovered something extraordinary. The planet's seemingly hostile environment wasn't a barrier. It was a complex communication system waiting to be understood. "It's not random," Gonzalez explained during a fleet-wide briefing. "These radiation patterns, these extreme geological shifts, they're a form of planetary language. We're not just adapting to the environment. We're learning to communicate with it." The young colonists were the real marvel. Children born into this environment didn't see the world as something to be conquered, but as a complex puzzle to be solved. Their education was a continuous real-time interaction with the planet's systems. Virtual reality merged seamlessly with actual planetary exploration, creating learning experiences that were part scientific research, part adventure, part survival strategy. Zeren Kosi's team developed the breakthrough that would change everything. They created a neural interface technology that allowed humans to directly experience the planet's complex energy systems. It wasn't just observation, it was a form of communication that transcended traditional biological limitations. "We're becoming something new," she reported, her neural link transmitting data that defied conventional scientific understanding. Not just humans adapting to a planet, but a new form of planetary intelligence. The first major settlement, christened Horizon Prime, grew like a living organism. Solar collection systems that were part photovoltaic technology, part biological membrane. Water reclamation units that were essentially artificial kidneys for the entire colony. Power generation that drew energy not just from traditional sources, but from the planet's own magnetic and thermal fluctuations. Governor Marcus Chen, now more of a coordination facilitator than a traditional leader, watched the developments with a sense of profound wonder. This was more than survival. This was evolution in real time. "We're not running from our past," he often said. "We're running toward our future." As the first 100 days of colonization concluded, Novaterra had transformed from a seemingly impossible environment to a testament of human potential. The planet was no longer something to be conquered, but a collaborative partner in humanity's greatest adventure. The stars above reflected a promise. This was just the beginning. The research citadel of Novaterra resembled nothing so much as a living organism, a massive structure that pulsed with electromagnetic rhythms, its walls composed of adaptive metamaterials that shifted and reconfigured based on the intellectual energy of its inhabitants. Dr. Arya Kim stood at the center of humanity's most radical research project. Her team wasn't just developing technology. They were rewriting the fundamental understanding of information, consciousness, and reality itself. "We're not creating a tool," she explained to a group of young researchers, her holographic presentation dancing with impossible geometric patterns. "We're negotiating with the fundamental fabric of existence." The distributed consciousness network was unlike anything previously conceived. Traditional computing had been a linear process: input, calculation, output. This was something entirely different. Information flowed like a living ecosystem, with thoughts becoming malleable constructs that could be shaped, merged, and transformed. In an adjacent lab, Dr. Kwesi Okoro worked on what the team called the resonance engine. It wasn't a machine in any traditional sense. Quantum entanglement had evolved from a scientific curiosity to a fundamental communication protocol. The device could manipulate probability itself, creating information pathways that defied classical understanding of causality. "Imagine communication that happens before the message is sent," Okoro would say, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of pure discovery, "where the context of a communication is more important than its content." The most unexpected breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A team of neurodivergent researchers, previously marginalized in traditional scientific structures, developed a communication network that operated on principles completely alien to conventional computational thinking. Maya Rodriguez, diagnosed with a complex form of synesthesia that allowed her to perceive mathematical patterns as intricate musical compositions, was the key. Her unique neurological structure became the foundation for what the team called the harmonic interface. "It's not about processing information," Maya explained during a fleet-wide presentation. "It's about listening to the universe's underlying song." The harmonic interface transformed computational processes into a form of collective intelligence that was part mathematics, part music, part pure potential. Complex problems that would have taken traditional supercomputers millennia to solve were now being resolved in moments, with solutions that were more like works of art than mathematical equations. Deep within the research citadel, an experimental project pushed the boundaries of human understanding. The Consciousness Transmission Lab explored the possibility of transferring human experience beyond traditional biological limitations. It wasn't about digital immortality. It was about expanding the very concept of individual and collective consciousness. Dr. Elena Gonzalez, leading the project, saw it as the next stage of human evolution. "We're not trying to escape our biological nature," she often said. "We're trying to understand its infinite potential." The technological developments came so rapidly that they defied conventional documentation. Each breakthrough seemed to cascade into multiple new fields of research. A method for manipulating quantum probabilities would suddenly reveal insights into biological adaptation. A new approach to information transfer would unlock understanding of planetary communication systems. Governor Marcus Chen watched these developments with a sense of profound wonder. The fleet that had escaped the Galactic Council was transforming into something far more significant than a mere civilization. They were becoming a living laboratory of potential. Outside the research citadel, the first generation of children born on Nova Terra played in environments that were equal parts educational interface and creative playground. Their educational systems were living networks that adapted in real time to individual learning patterns, curiosity streams becoming tangible exploratory paths. "We're not just developing technology," Dr. Aria Kim would explain in her lectures. "We're creating a new language of existence. Every breakthrough is a conversation with the universe, not a conquest." The most radical aspect of their work was its collaborative nature. Traditional scientific competition had been replaced by a form of collective intelligence. Researchers from different disciplines didn't just share information, they merged their cognitive processes, creating solutions that transcended individual capability. As the first year of research concluded, the team gathered to celebrate not just their achievements, but the very process of discovery. The walls of the research citadel seemed to pulse with potential, with unspoken possibilities waiting to be explored. Nova Terra was more than a colony. It was becoming a forge of potential, a place where the boundaries between technology, consciousness, and imagination dissolved completely. The universe was about to receive a message it had never anticipated. Humanity was no longer just a species. They were becoming a force of pure, unbounded potential. The Kritax scout ship emerged from quantum suppression at the edge of an unremarkable star system, its crystalline sensors probing the darkness. Captain Varlik, a veteran of 100 diplomatic missions, felt something unprecedented, a sense of genuine uncertainty. Humanity was supposed to be wounded, broken, exiled. Instead, the sensors painted a picture that defied every intelligence report. A network of orbital structures surrounded them, not massive military installations, but something far more complex. Each structure seemed to breathe, to pulse with an organic intelligence that made traditional Kritax sensor arrays feel like primitive stone tools. Energy signatures danced across spectrums that shouldn't even exist, creating patterns that looked like mathematical poetry. "Initiate communication protocols," Varlik instructed, the translation matrix in his neural implant humming with anticipation. What happened next was not first contact. It was a cultural judo match. Before Varlik could complete the standard Kritax diplomatic introduction, a ritualistic series of mathematical proofs designed to establish hierarchical communication, the human response arrived. It wasn't a message. It was an experience. Holographic constructs filled the Kritax bridge, not as mere images, but as living narratives. Each projection was a multi-dimensional story that simultaneously conveyed historical context, emotional landscape, and strategic intent. Mathematical equations danced with cultural memories. Scientific discoveries intertwined with artistic expressions. Commander Zarin Kozy appeared, but not as a traditional diplomatic representative. Her presence was a quantum entanglement of information, part hologram, part living narrative, part mathematical proof. "We've been expecting you," her projection said, though said was inadequate. The communication was a symphonic burst of understanding that transcended language. The Kritax communication protocols, refined over millennia of galactic interactions, suddenly felt like child's play. Humanity wasn't responding to first contact. They were rewriting the entire concept of communication. Varlek's neural implants struggled to process the incoming transmission. What should have been a straightforward diplomatic exchange became a multi-dimensional exploration of potential interactions. Cultural context, technological capabilities, philosophical frameworks, all were simultaneously presented and experienced. In the observation deck of the human orbital platform, a team of xenolinguists and quantum communication specialists watched the interaction with professional excitement. They have no idea what's happening. Dr. Elena Rodriguez chuckled, watching the Krutax ship's systems try to manage the incoming transmission. We're not speaking to them. We're inviting them to a different way of understanding. The Krutax had approached expecting a wounded civilization. Instead, they found a culture that had transformed exile into an opportunity for radical reimagining. Each moment of the interaction was a strategic masterpiece. Humanity wasn't just defending its existence. They were demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to interstellar interaction. Where traditional diplomatic encounters were chess matches of carefully measured moves, this was more like an improvisational jazz performance where the very instruments were constantly being reinvented. Varlek's second-in-command, a younger Krutax named Celera, watched in fascination. The human transmission was revealing more than just information. It was a living ecosystem of potential interactions. They're not trying to convince us of anything, Celera observed. They're demonstrating possibility. The orbital platform itself became part of the communication. Adaptive structures shifted and reconfigured, creating visual metaphors that communicated complex technological and cultural concepts. A section would momentarily resemble a Krutax mathematical proof, then dissolve into a human artistic representation, then transform into a pure information network. Governor Marcus Chen, monitoring from Novaterra, understood the deeper strategy. This wasn't just first contact. This was an invitation to a different paradigm of existence. We're not here to be understood, he had briefed the communication team. We're here to expand the very concept of understanding. The Krutax ship's systems began to resonate with the incoming transmission. What had started as a standard reconnaissance mission was transforming into something unprecedented. The very act of observation was changing both the observers and the observed. Varlek realized, with a mixture of professional excitement and existential vertigo, that humanity had just demonstrated something profound. They weren't a civilization to be categorized, analyzed, or contained. They were a living, evolving conversation with the universe itself. As the transmission concluded, the Krutax ship hung in space, not defeated, not conquered, but fundamentally transformed. First contact was complete, but this was just the beginning. The Concordia Prime communication hub became a maelstrom of conflicting signals, encrypted transmissions, and raw panic. What had been a simple act of banishment was unraveling into something far more complex. Ambassador Lyra, Tsar of the Andromeda Compact, stood before the fractured Galactic Council, her holographic projection flickering with barely contained emotion. "This is not a simple matter of a rogue species," she declared. "This is a fundamental restructuring of our understanding of civilization." The Krutax transmission had spread like a quantum virus through diplomatic channels. It wasn't just information. It was a perspective-altering experience that challenged every established protocol of interstellar communication. In the secure archives of the Zorn Imperium's Central Intelligence, data analysts worked in a state of perpetual shock. The human transmission they had intercepted defied conventional analysis. Traditional intelligence gathering had become obsolete. What they were examining was less a communication and more a living, breathing ecosystem of potential interactions. Director Krulvax, head of Zorn Strategic Intelligence, watched the analysis with a mixture of professional fascination and deep existential concern. The human approach wasn't just innovative, it was fundamentally destabilizing to the entire galactic power structure. "They're not building an empire," Krulvax muttered to his chief analyst. They're dismantling the very concept of empire. The response from different galactic powers was a study in contrasting reactions. The Silicon Concordance saw the humans as a fascinating evolutionary anomaly. The Biological Harmony League viewed them with a mixture of terror and reluctant admiration. The corporate Stellar Consortium began immediately calculating the potential economic implications. On a dozen different worlds, diplomatic teams and xenosociologists worked overtime. The human transmission wasn't just a message, it was a comprehensive reimagining of interstellar interaction. Dr. Emal Hassan, a leading xenocultural analyst from the Orion Research Collective, described it best in an emergency symposium. Imagine, she told her colleagues, a civilization that doesn't just communicate, but transforms the very act of communication into a living, breathing entity. The Galactic Council's emergency session became a microcosm of the larger crisis. Traditional power brokers found themselves completely out of their depth. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had turned exile into an opportunity for total reinvention. Governor Marcus Chen watched these developments from Novaterra, understanding the deeper strategy at play. This wasn't about confrontation. This was about expanding the very concept of possibility. "We're not fighting the system," he had told his strategic team. "We're demonstrating that the system is fundamentally limited." The economic implications were staggering. The human approach to technology and communication began to spread like an intellectual pandemic. Trading networks that had been stable for centuries started to reconfigure themselves. Economic models that had seemed immutable began to show unexpected fractures. Most terrifying to the established powers was the humans' complete lack of traditional imperial ambition. They weren't seeking territory. They weren't demanding resources. They were simply existing. And in that existence, they were changing everything. The Zorn Imperium's most advanced war simulations began to break down. Traditional conflict models became useless when confronted with a civilization that didn't think in terms of victory or defeat, but in terms of continuous transformation. Ambassador Lyra Tissar summarized it best in her controversial report to the Andromeda Compact. Humanity is not a threat to be contained. They are a fundamental challenge to our understanding of civilization itself. Deep in the communication networks, something unprecedented was happening. The human transmission was creating connections between civilizations that had been isolated for millennia. Old conflicts began to seem inexplicably trivial. Diplomatic channels that had been frozen for generations suddenly became fluid, adaptive spaces of potential interaction. The Galactic Council found itself in an impossible position. Their act of banishment had not destroyed humanity. It had unleashed something far more dangerous, a completely new approach to existence. Krelvax of the Zorn Imperium made a recommendation that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. "We need to understand them," he told his colleagues. "Not control them. Not fight them. Understand them." As reports continued to flood in, one thing became crystal clear. The humans weren't just surviving. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of galactic interaction. The tremor that began with a simple act of banishment was becoming a fundamental restructuring of galactic civilization. And they were just getting started. The approach of the Zorn Imperium's battle fleet was a mathematical symphony of destruction. 17,000 ships, each a perfect crystalline weapon of unprecedented destructive potential, moved with a precision that had crushed civilizations for millennia. Admiral Varkak studied the holographic tactical display with the cold calculation of a veteran strategist. Humanity would be reduced to a footnote in galactic history, a cautionary tale of what happens when a species overreaches. What the Zorn didn't understand was that they were about to fight an enemy that didn't recognize the very concept of traditional warfare. The first indication came when the fleet's quantum communication networks began to drift. It wasn't a hack. It wasn't an attack. It was something far more unsettling. The very fabric of their communication began to transform, like ink spreading on adaptive paper. Admiral Elena Rodriguez watched from the distributed command network of Novaterra. This wasn't a battle to be won. It was a conversation to be conducted. "Initiate quantum resonance protocol," she instructed, her voice calm despite the approaching armada. The human response wasn't a fleet. It wasn't even a traditional defensive formation. What emerged was a living, breathing network of adaptive intelligence that defied every known principle of spatial engagement. Individual human ships weren't ships in any traditional sense. They were nodes in a vast, living computational matrix. Each vessel was simultaneously a weapon, a communication hub, a research station, and a potential seed of civilization. They moved not in formation, but in a fluid dance that seemed to anticipate the Zorn's every potential move before the move was even conceived. Dr. Zoran Kosi, leading the adaptive response team, had developed something beyond conventional military strategy. The human fleet was a distributed consciousness, a living organism that could reconfigure itself at the speed of thought. The Zorn battle algorithms began to fragment. Their perfectly calculated attack vectors twisted into impossible geometries. Weapon systems that had been designed to obliterate entire planetary systems found themselves redirected, their own energy turned into complex informational patterns. "We're not fighting," Nkosi explained to her team. "We're negotiating the very concept of conflict." Each human ship was a quantum entanglement of potential responses. They didn't block attacks. They transformed them. Energy weapons were converted into information streams. Destructive force became a medium of communication. Admiral Varkax watched in growing horror as his perfectly designed battle strategy dissolved. The human response wasn't just defensive. It was a fundamental reimagining of the engagement itself. Weapon systems began to produce impossible outputs. A missile launch would suddenly become a complex mathematical proof. A defensive shield would transform into a cultural exchange program. The very act of attack was being turned into a dialogue. The distributed human command network operated on principles that made the Zorn tactical systems look like primitive counting tools. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about survival. It was about expanding the very concept of interaction. Governor Marcus Chen monitored the engagement from Novaterra, understanding the deeper strategy. "We're not here to defeat them," he told his team. "We're here to show them a different way of existing." The engagement lasted what seemed like both an eternity and a microsecond. Traditional time became a meaningless concept. When it was over, the Zorn battle fleet remained physically intact. But something fundamental had changed. Their communication networks, their strategic algorithms, their very understanding of conflict, all had been transformed. Admiral Varkax found himself experiencing something unprecedented. What had been a clear mission of destruction had become a profound philosophical encounter. The human weapon wasn't a tool of war. It was a tool of perspective transformation. "We haven't been defeated," a junior Zorn tactical officer reported, confusion evident in his vocal modulations. "But we've been changed." The human response was transmitted not as a message of triumph, but as an invitation to understand, an invitation to evolve. As the Zorn fleet hung in space, its systems recalibrating, one thing became clear. This was not a victory in any traditional sense. This was a metamorphosis. Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful weapon is not destruction. It is understanding. The reconstruction of the Galactic Council chambers was more than a physical renovation. It was a symbolic rebirth. Where once stood rigid architectural monuments to bureaucratic power, now existed a dynamic space that seemed to breathe with potential. Adaptive surfaces shifted and reconfigured, reflecting the discussions happening within. Holographic representations of different civilizations merged and separated, creating living topographies of diplomatic interaction. Ambassador Lyra Tassar stood at the center, representing a coalition of species fundamentally transformed by humanity's unexpected journey. The old hierarchies had dissolved, replaced by something far more complex and nuanced. "Banishment," she began, her voice carrying through multiple linguistic and cultural translation matrices, "was never our ending. It was our beginning." The gathered representatives were no longer simply diplomats. They were witnesses to a fundamental transformation of galactic civilization. Dr. Marcus Chen watched from Novaterra, understanding that this moment was about far more than political reconciliation. It was about redefining the very concept of civilization. The human contribution wasn't a demand for territory or resources. It was a comprehensive framework for adaptive cooperation. Where previous galactic interactions had been based on static power structures, humanity proposed a dynamic ecosystem of potential. The Zorn Imperium, once the most militaristic of galactic powers, had undergone the most profound transformation. Their rigid silicon-based culture now incorporated adaptive learning protocols inspired by human cognitive flexibility. Their representative, no longer a cold tactical entity, demonstrated a newfound capacity for nuanced understanding. On Novaterra, the first generation of children born in exile represented something entirely new. They weren't just human. They were a living bridge between what was and what could be. Zaran Kosi's daughter, Aria, demonstrated this perfectly during an impromptu demonstration. Using a combination of neural interface and quantum communication technology, she simultaneously translated complex mathematical concepts into artistic expressions, scientific hypotheses into musical compositions. Communication isn't about speaking, she told the assembled representatives. It's about creating shared understanding. The economic models that emerged were equally revolutionary. Traditional resource extraction gave way to collaborative development protocols. Species that had been competitors for millennia now found themselves part of a living, adaptive network of mutual growth. The Kritax, who had first encountered humanity's unique approach to interaction, became key architects of this new framework. Their mathematical precision merged with human creative adaptability, creating governance models that were both structured and infinitely flexible. Governor Elena Rodriguez reflected on the journey. Exile hadn't been a punishment. It had been an opportunity for total reinvention. We didn't just survive, she often said. We discovered what we could become. The technological developments that emerged from this new collaborative framework defied previous understanding. Faster-than-light communication became a living network of shared consciousness. Planetary development transformed from extraction to symbiotic co-evolution. Dr. Imani Rahman's research team on Novaterra had developed ecological integration technologies that allowed entire civilizations to develop collaborative relationships with their planetary environments. What was once seen as resource management was now a complex dance of mutual adaptation. The Galactic Council was no longer a static governing body. It had become a dynamic, living network of potential interactions. Decisions weren't made through voting, but through collective computational reasoning that took into account not just immediate outcomes, but potential future evolutions. Ambassador Tsar presented the final framework, a set of cooperative principles that was less a legal document and more a living algorithm of mutual understanding. We are not creating rules, she explained. We are creating a method of continuous adaptation. As the session concluded, the representatives didn't just leave with agreements. They left with a fundamentally transformed understanding of what was possible. Dr. Marcus Chen, watching from Novaterra, understood the deeper significance. This wasn't about humanity's triumph. This was about expanding the very concept of civilization. The holographic displays began to shift, showing not static diplomatic boundaries, but dynamic networks of potential interaction. Species that had been isolated for millennia now found themselves part of a living, breathing galactic ecosystem. In the research citadel on Novaterra, a group of young researchers worked on something unprecedented. Not a technology, not a weapon, not a diplomatic protocol. A method of understanding. As the sun set on Novaterra, casting its light across a landscape that was part biological marvel, part technological wonder, one thing became clear. This was not an ending. This was a beginning.